Hello, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, wherever I end up putting this up. My name is Kobe. This is the Pro Peace Report. So I wanted to just jump on real quick for a short little video. It's not going to be as long as some of my past episodes, talking about the US, China, and Taiwan, and how the US stance on Taiwan is completely hypocritical because the US claims to support the self-determination of the Taiwanese people. But as we will see from all of the evidence that I'm going to show you, it's always been geopolitical for the US in terms of Taiwan and China. We've always wanted to support the capitalists in China against the communists. And it's always been about weakening the communists. It's not about actually caring about the principle of self-determination, because as we'll see, if we really cared about the principle of self-determination, we would extend the same principle to other geopolitical conflicts around the world and to our own colonies. And so let me share the screen real quick so you can see what I'm talking about here. And so here we'll start off with talking about this new poll that came out recently. This is from August 26th, 2021. For the first time, half of Americans favored defending Taiwan if China invades. So let's look at it. 2021 Chicago Council survey data show a majority of Americans support a range of US policies toward Taiwan: recognition as an independent country, inclusion in international organizations, and a US-Taiwan free trade agreement. So the key findings: the American public supports a range of US policies in support of Taiwan. A majority support recognition, supporting inclusion in international organizations, and a free trade agreement. A slimmer majority, 53%, support the United States signing a formal alliance with Taiwan, and a plurality, 46%, favor explicitly committing to defend Taiwan if China invades. When asked about a range of potential scenarios, just over half Americans, 52%, favor using US troops to defend if China were to invade the island. And so, I mean, on face value, some Americans are thinking, oh, but don't their people want independence? Shouldn't the US be supportive of preventing an invading army from cracking down on an independence movement? And I'm not saying that I want to see people who want independence in Taiwan cracked down on by police. I'm against police. I don't like police brutality. I don't like it when any military, any country around the world uses it. But is it our place to get involved in their internal affairs, so much so that we're willing to go to war with a nuclear power? I mean, we got involved in Iraq, we got involved in Afghanistan, we got involved in Libya. And what happened as a result? We killed countless civilians and we made the situation worse. Currently, right now, we want to free the DPRK, free North Korea from their evil, horrible dictator, Kim Jong-un. But we're putting sanctions on their country that's depriving the country of food and medicine. It's causing the people in that country to suffer. And it's not causing them to rise up and overthrow their dictator. No, it's causing the country to close down more. It's causing them to isolate themselves. And they're using US imperialism, which US imperialism in North Korea has been going on forever. Since the Korean War, since North Korea first became its own separate entity from South Korea, the US has always imperialistically been involved. We killed a quarter of their population in that war. So it makes sense why people in that region would come behind their government to stop us. And as I'm about to show you, the situation in Taiwan has always been the same way. The US has always been trying to support capitalist nationalist forces against the communists in China. So let's get to that now. So we have this thread here. February 1949, US diplomat Livingston T. Merchant was sent by Atchison to Taiwan on a field mission to see if there could be an autonomous government set up in Taiwan. He met with the chairman of Taiwan provincial government, Chen Chang. Here were the offers. If Chen separated the provincial government from the national government and cut off communication with communists, the US will send $25 million in aid. So we were dangling aid over top of them, trying to get them to separate from the communists in the mainland China. Allied forces occupied Taiwan, and a meeting on transfer of power to new government would take place. After meeting takes place, the US will send its Navy and Air Force to the Taiwan Strait to prevent attack. Inform Chiang that if he wishes to go to Taiwan, he would have to do so as a political refugee. Merchant made the offer to the wrong person. Chen was loyal to Chiang, and although he was anti-communist, he was a Chinese nationalist who refused to separate Taiwan from the mainland. As we can see, attempts to create a two China or one China, one Taiwan situation by a segment of US imperialists began shortly after World War II. Anyways, the People's Republic of China was established on October 1st, 1949. Another section of imperialists did not wish to split China, though they did not want to recognize the new socialist government. They also wanted to cut ties with Chiang. They did not want the Taiwan issue to ruin relations with the People's Republic of China, and instead wanted to win them over from the Soviets, taking advantage of historical Sino-Russo contradictions. Tsarist Russia had intended to take China's northeast, inner and outer Mongolia, and Xinjiang. January 5th, 1950, Truman upholds the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Communique, recognizing Taiwan as a part of China. And that's been the US stance since. We believe in a one China policy. However much so we subversively try to push for separation, we support the one China policy because the People's Republic of China would be pissed if we didn't. Chiang's troops were demoralized. Many of them fought in the ROC army against their will and wanted to go home. A few centuries earlier, remnants of the Ming on Taiwan were defeated by the Qing. Chiang felt that history was going to repeat itself and was ready to negotiate with Mao Zedong. The Communist Party of China planned on liberating Taiwan in 1950, but faced a few setbacks. A delegation headed by Louis Schopke went to Moscow to meet Stalin, asked for 200 planes and pilot training. Stalin said no because the USSR suffered great losses during World War II and didn't want to risk war with the US. Whereas Stalin was reluctant to promise much to China regarding Taiwan, he had a different attitude regarding Korea since it has a greater geopolitical impact on the USSR. In 1949, he promised Kim Il-sung that if war broke out in Korea, the USSR would deliver material aid. Kim Il-sung then went to Beijing to talk to Mao about this in early 1950. The Chinese and Korean communists formed a great bond during their war against Japan, and Mao also understood the geo implications of war in Korea. And I think the rest of this here is more so about the situation and how it relates to North Korea. It's not really what I'm talking about in this video here. The whole point that I'm trying to get to here is that the US's policy in China has never truly been about democracy and self-determination because the communists won the war. The communists were the ones who had a revolution in China and took power going forward. The US always wanted to support capitalists in China. It's always been about communism, capitalism divide. Because if it was about democracy and authoritarianism, why would we have been supporting Pinochet in Chile? Why would we have been supporting authoritarian countries around the world? Because it's not about authoritarianism versus democracy. For the US, the motives are always increasing our capitalist sphere of influence and weakening those that we deem communist strategically. And so China right now is a rising power. China is set to pass the US as the richest country in the world, the global hegemon, by the end of this decade. And so it's no coincidence that the US would want independence for Taiwan, independence for Hong Kong, and criticizing the treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Because the whole point is we want to balkanize China. Because a China that splits off into 4 or 5 different countries is not a China that can pass the US geopolitically. That's the motive here. And so we have here, secret group of US military trainers has been in Taiwan for at least a year. This is from October 7th, so about 6 days ago. Small contingent of U.S. Special Forces and Marines training local forces in latest sign of rising U.S.-China tensions. And I'm not going to go into the article. You can read that. I just wanted to point out that the U.S. has been secretly training people in Taiwan for a potential war with China. Here's another one. It's from October 22nd, 2020. U.S. approves 1.8 billion weapons sale to Taiwan. So again, we have been getting involved in their internal conflict for quite some time. And I get it. Some people think that they're doing this for good motived reasons. But as we've seen, the US always militarily gets involved in internal countries' conflicts because they think they're doing it for good reasons. What ends up happening is war, death, destruction, and a whole mess, all because we claim to have good intentions while some people are doing it for geostrategic reasons to weaken that country. And so now I wanted to compare. So the US claims to care about self-determination in China. We claim to care about self-determination in Taiwan. We claim to care about self-determination in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. But as you'll see, we're not consistent with our belief in self-determination. This is how you know it's geopolitical. So Trump says US opposes independence bid in Spain's Catalonia region. And what did Trump say? President Trump said Tuesday that the United States opposes an independence drive in the Spanish region of Catalonia, telling reporters that such secession would be foolish. Quote, I think Spain is a great country and it should remain united, Trump said during a news conference with the visiting Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy. The president's remarks mark a departure from the official position of the United States, which as recently as Monday was that a planned non-binding Catalonia referendum Sunday to separate from Spain was an internal matter. Now you see, the US believes that an independence movement in Spain is an internal matter. But when it comes to possible secessionists in Taiwan, when it comes to possible secessionists in Hong Kong, it escalates from an internal matter to a matter that the US needs to go in and save them and spread democracy and free them from the evil authoritarian government. When in Spain, I think I have the article here too, about what happened in the Catalonia region of Spain. I mean, you could argue this was an authoritarian situation as well, and we supported a united Spain. We supported the Spanish government dealing with it themselves. And so let's look here. Catalan referendum. Preliminary results show 90% in favor of independence. Spanish Prime Minister defends violent response to poll as raids on ballot stations by riot police leave hundreds of Catalans injured. Catalan officials have claimed that preliminary results of its referendum have shown 90% in favor of independence in the vote vehemently opposed by Spain. Jordi Turell, the Catalan regional government spokesman, told reporters early on Monday morning that 90% of the 2.26 million Catalans who voted Sunday chose yes. He said nearly 8% rejected independence and the rest of the ballots were blank or void. He said 15,000 votes were still being counted. The region has 5.3 million registered voters. Turell said that the number of ballots did not include those confiscated by Spanish police during violent raids, which resulted in hundreds of people being injured. At least 844 people and 33 police were reported to have been hurt, including at least 2 people who were thought to have been seriously injured. Catalan's regional leader, Carles Puigdemont, spoke out against the violence with a pointed address. On this day of hope and suffering, Catalonia's citizens have earned the right to have an independent state in the form of a republic. And so we see here the turnout was only slightly over 50% of the people who turned out. But a big reason why only 50% of people turned out in that vote is because the Spanish government was telling them, no, this is an illegitimate vote. We will crack down on you. We will prevent it from going forward. And they did. Hundreds of people got injured and ballots were stolen. If there had been an allowed independence region or independence vote by the Spanish government, you would have seen a higher turnout. We would have gotten a more clear picture on how people felt about independence there. But as a result of this, Puigdemont did a unilateral declaration of independence and immediately suspended the Declaration of Independence to negotiate with Spain. What happened? All of the people in the Catalonian government were charged and they were trying to imprison them for like treason, for like 10 years in prison. I don't know every detail of how it turned out, but there was a brutal crackdown by the Spanish government on these secessionists in Catalonia. And what happened? The US supported the Spanish government because the West protects their own. The capitalists protect their own. When it comes to communists, now, if you're trying to have an independence movement against communists, the US, the global capitalist power of the world, will support you. But if it's against a capitalist government, no, you need to stay in your place. So let's go to another situation where I think there was some hypocrisy from the West, and especially the US, when it comes to self-determination of peoples, which is in the UN Charter as a principle. Ukraine's president says US stance on Crimea will deprive Kremlin of its imperial ambitions. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko on Wednesday welcomed the Trump administration's unequivocal declaration on Crimea, expressing optimism the declaration will finally deprive the Kremlin of its imperial ambitions. Let's get to the point. Crimea belongs to Ukraine and it is non-negotiable. It wasn't, isn't, and can't be compromised. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo earlier issued a statement declaring unambiguously the U.S. view that Crimea belongs to Ukraine, that its annexation by Russia will not be recognized, and that the position will not change until the occupation ends. And so what happened in this referendum in Crimea? So give a little bit of background. There's a history of Crimea being in a part of Russia. You know, when the USSR was a thing, eventually Spain broke off, Spain became their own country, but people in Crimea are not so sure that they want to be part of Ukraine. A lot of them connect more with Russia. And so if it's about self-determination of peoples, you would think that we would support a referendum on the vote. Because at least if you have a referendum on the vote, you can see exactly how the people feel. And if the people feel one way, you shouldn't take a stance one way or another. If you truly cared about the self-determination of people, if the US truly cared, they would not say it's unnegotiably Ukraine. Because what if the people of Crimea don't want to be that? You know what I mean? Is that really self-determination? If we say no, if we say that Ukrainian law supersedes self-determination of people of Crimea? And so we'll see. Crimeans vote overwhelmingly to secede from Ukraine, join Russia. Fireworks exploded and Russian flags fluttered above jubilant crowds Sunday after residents in Crimea voted overwhelmingly to secede from Ukraine and join Russia. The United States and Europe condemned the ballot as illegal and destabilizing and were expected to slap sanctions against Russia for it. Ukraine's new government in Kiev called the referendum a circus, directed at gunpoint by Moscow, referring to the thousands of Russian troops now in the strategic Black Sea Peninsula after seizing it 2 weeks ago. In a phone call to Russian President Vladimir Putin, President Barack Obama said that the referendum, quote, which violates the Ukrainian constitution and occurred under duress of Russian military intervention, would never be recognized by the United States and the international community, the White House said. But after the polls closed late Sunday, crowds of ethnic Russians in the regional Crimean capital of Simferopol erupted with jubilant chants in the main square, overjoyed at the prospects of once again becoming part of Russia. And so let's see, what did the vote turn out? The Crimea referendum offered voters the choice of seeking annexation by Russia or remaining in Ukraine with greater autonomy. After 50% of the ballots were counted, Mikhail Melishov, head of the referendum committee, said that more than 95% of voters had approved splitting off and joining Russia. Opponents of secession appeared to have stayed away Sunday, denouncing the vote as a cynical power play and land grab by Russia. And so the whole point here is, in some situations, you see that the US claims to support self-determination. But when it came to the situation in Crimea, they cried foul more about Russia and never said there should still be a vote. You should still allow the people of Crimea to have a self-determination vote to determine whether they want to be part of Russia or part of Ukraine. No. What our stance was, is that Ukrainian national law supersedes the self-determination of the people in Ukraine or of the people in Crimea. And I'm pretty sure Ukrainian national law says that any such vote would need to be held nationally by the entire country. Well, but of course, if you're in a tiny region and you want to escape from this other country, this country that claims that you're part of them, and you give them all a vote and you're an economic power, you're a strategic location for them, of course they're going to vote against it. Nobody wants their country to break up. Nobody wants a region to split off. But if we're talking about the principle of self-determination, if that's what it's really about, and this is a similar situation to Taiwan and Hong Kong in that some people in this region want to break off and secede. Okay, well, in Taiwan and Hong Kong, the US supports them having a say, and only them, not the People's Republic of China. But in Ukraine, it's the opposite. In Catalonia, it's the opposite. And so now I want to get into, and let's actually look at this one first. I want to get into some more hypocrisy of US on self-determination. Now, the US has many colonies still. They refer to them as territories. That's a euphemism for colonies still. And so let's look at these colonies of the US. We have Puerto Rico. We have the US Virgin Islands. We have Guam. We have the Northern Mariana Islands. And we have American Samoa. We have all these other ones here as well. And so you would think that if the US supported the concept of self-determination, they would extend the same self-determination they want to see in Taiwan, the same self-determination they want to see in Hong Kong. You would think they would extend it to these colonies as well. But they don't. Americans divided over status of Puerto Rico. Now, this is an article from 1998. It's hard to find more updated. I got one more poll, we'll see. It's hard to find updated opinions on this, but just to give you a little picture of how Americans are thinking about self-determination in Puerto Rico. As the issue heats up in Congress, public opinion in the United States splits three ways on the political future of Puerto Rico. According to a new Gallup poll, 28% would like to see the Caribbean island become an independent nation. 30% prefer to admit it as the 51st state, and 26% prefer to maintain Puerto Rico as a U.S. Commonwealth. Colony is what that word means. And so you could see in 1998, the American people were split three different directions, totally split three different directions. Now, how did things change over time? This is a poll from YouGov and The Economist. I clicked on it. I can click on it again. It was from 2016. So how did things evolve from 1998 to 2016? 20% think that Puerto Rico should be an independent country, so it's down. 25% think that Puerto Rico should stick with the current status, basically steady. 29% think that it should be the 51st state of the Union, steady. But so less people supported independence for Puerto Rico as time went on. Now let's look at this here. How Hurricane Maria pushed young Puerto Ricans towards supporting independence. Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico 4 years ago last month, but to Ismael Pagan Gonzalez, those 3 weeks post-disaster when he couldn't get in contact with his father on the island are as vivid as if they had just occurred. So let's keep going. Though there is little comprehensive data speaking to the age breakdown of Puerto Rico's status affiliation, it has been well documented that young Puerto Ricans are leading a crusade for political change that only accelerated in the aftermath of Maria. Now, some independence activists, I've seen them on Twitter, they would dispute this claim that it just came from Hurricane Maria. They would say that this has been an ongoing struggle for independence among people in Puerto Rico. While Puerto Ricans often hold complicated and nuanced views towards the island's political status that are not adequately reflected by existing labels, several young Puerto Ricans told Insider how the hurricane and related crises have pushed them towards the independence movement. Quote, Hurricane Maria was the biggest example that the island can do things on their own, especially for our generation. We didn't have electricity, food, and water, and we were able to come together, be resilient, and resist with minimal help from the U.S. I don't know if you remember Trump's toilet paper toss. They gave them some aid, but there was a law, U.S. law, because they're a colony, U.S. law preventing international aid from coming into Puerto Rico for a while after Hurricane Maria. Martinez, who is pro-independence and who does not want to see Puerto Rico become a state, said that no matter their political affiliation, her generation, which is sometimes referred to as Generation Maria, has already been through so much, and that it's been done. Done with being in the middle of a status that doesn't have real meaning. Generally, there are three main positions among Puerto Ricans: pro-independence, pro-commonwealth, and pro-statehood. There are two main political parties on the island: the Popular Democratic Party, which advocates for Puerto Rico's status as an unincorporated territory, and the New Progressive Party, which is pro-statehood. A growing number of voters support the Puerto Rican Independence Party, according to the Puerto Rico State Commission on Elections. Quote, "I have always been pro-statehood." Francisco Proscure Valerio, a 23-year-old who grew up in Guaynabo, who has conducted polling on Puerto Rico's status as a data analyst for Change Research, told Insider. Quote, "But young people generally skew toward independence and are anti-Commonwealth. Almost no one my age is for the Commonwealth." And so let's look at one of these polls here, or we'll look at a breakdown of these parties. And so what were the names of the parties again? So we have the New Progressive Party, which supports statehood, and the Popular Democratic Party, which is for maintaining the status as a colony. And so we'll see here. In 2012, we had the Independence Party only has 2% here. 2016, 2%. It surges up to 7%. And then you can see it's basically split among colony and statehood otherwise. But you see these are shrinking numbers. From 2012 to 2020, you see the numbers for independence are growing, and the numbers for commonwealth and statehood are shrinking. And so that naturally raises the question that if the US cared about self-determination, wouldn't they give Puerto Rico a say on this situation? Now, you hear a lot of Republicans who say, no, they shouldn't be a state because it's just the Democrats trying to get another state to give themselves more representatives and more senators, and it's like a Trojan horse for the Democratic Party. That's what Republicans are saying. Then you have Democrats who are saying, yes, we believe in statehood for Puerto Rico. They deserve a say on whether they should be a state. But what's noticeably absent from US discourse on Puerto Rico is the idea of independence. Why is there no ballot initiative being discussed in America about giving them three choices: staying a colony, being independent, and being a state, and allowing an information campaign, a fair and balanced campaign, so that independence activists who've been feeling suppressed for a really long time, so that they are capable of educating people of what independence would mean for them. But no, the Democratic Party only supports statehood because they want more power, more imperial power for the United States. So why, on one hand, would they support independence in Taiwan, independence in Hong Kong, but when it came to Spain and Catalonia, we supported the Spanish government. When it came to Ukraine and Crimea, we supported the Ukrainian government. When it comes to Puerto Rico and the US, we support statehood, the United States national government. We do not give them a choice for independence, and that is how you know it's not about self-determination. And so one last thing, just to give you an idea of how it could look if the US was willing to give self-determination to Puerto Rico, and you could even say the same in China and Taiwan. A referendum took place on Thursday, 18th September 2014, on Scottish independence from the United Kingdom. The referendum question was, should Scotland be an independent country? Which voters answered with yes or no. The no side won, with 55.3% against independence, which was 44.7%. And so you see in this situation, the British government, who had been resistant for a long time, they actually allowed the vote to happen, and independence was not the popular position. They're actually trying to push for another independence position because now, with England or with the UK leaving the European Union, which was something that Scotland did not support, Scotland wanted to stay in the European Union, there are pushes for another independence referendum, which I think should happen. I think countries should be able to self-determine these things. Self-determine, not the US determine. And so now we have another situation here. Oh, this is Quebec. Quebec and their independence ballot that they have. So Quebec referendum of 1995, referendum held in the Canadian province of Quebec that's proposed sovereignty for the province within a new economic and political partnership between Quebec and the rest of Canada. The referendum was defeated by a margin of only 1%. The failure of the Meech Lake Accord, which would have recognized Quebec's status as a distinct society, which addressed both greater autonomy for Quebec and the Aboriginal population, left considerable uncertainty about the constitutional future of Canada. But the whole point is that Canada gave Quebec a vote. Canada let Quebec decide for themselves. That is what self-determination is all about. And so that's all I had today for this video. I just wanted to show you that when it comes to Taiwan, the US has always been trying to use Taiwan as a wedge against the Communist Party of China. It's not about the self-determination of the people there. It was about taking down a communist government. And as we see from the example of the US supporting Spain against Catalonia and their independence movement, as we see from the example of the US being opposed to Crimean self-determination, and as we see from the US being opposed to self-determination for the Puerto Rican people and other US colonies. The point is not that the United States government truly cares about the self-determination of people, something in the UN Charter. No, what the US cares about is their geopolitical, geostrategic interests. They want to weaken China. They want to prevent China from passing the United States as the global hegemon. And they're using Taiwan as a pawn in their chess game. Now, this is not to say that I'm against self-determination. If the people in Taiwan truly wanted it, I do think they should have that. But the whole point is that the United States cannot be the one who dictates that position. It is an internal affair between the People's Republic of China and the people in Taiwan. They need to sort that out themselves, because as we've seen throughout history, the United States, when we get involved in other countries' internal affairs on situations like this, we leave death and destruction in our wake. From Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Yemen. We make things worse when we militarily get involved with arms sales, with military support, subversive, secret military support, just like we're doing in Taiwan. It makes things worse. US sanctions make things worse, whether it's Cuba, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Nicaragua. When we put sanctions on countries trying to force them to meet our will, to what we claim is to living up to human rights, but what ends up happening is that the countries disregard the United States and our stated principles because they see it as a Trojan horse. And so what ends up happening is they close down, they don't listen to us, they isolate more, they do their own thing with their own country like we would want to do with ours. And what ends up happening is all the sanctions do is make human rights worse for the people in those regions. It deprives people of food, deprives people of medicines. And the goal, you could see if you look up documents of the US goal on Cuba, the US goal in Iran that Mike Pompeo said during the Trump administration. The goal with sanctions is to starve the people. It is to make the people upset because we think that making the people upset through sanctions will cause them to blame their government for the suffering. But as we've seen, it's provable that US sanctions are the cause of the problem. And so those governments correctly point out that the reason why this suffering is happening is US imperialism, not the government's policies towards the people. So that's all I have for today. Hope you enjoyed this episode. There can never be justice until there's peace. Or there can never be peace until there's justice. Whew.